Hey everybody, my name is Kelly and I was in the industry for about 14 years before I had a kiddo and that made it impossible to be in this industry. Some people could do it, I couldn't. I have known the original pirate Marshall for 10 years and I met him in South Carolina and he's been one of my best friends for the last decade and I have nothing but good things to say about him, and I'm so glad that he invited me here to do this today. So, yeah, this is my go cry in the walk-in story. I got a job at a swanky bistro in Denver, Colorado, in the rich part of Denver, Colorado. And it was the first job that I had ever had to try out for. I had to actually audition for, I guess. And so it was a pretty sweet gig. I was not the only person who was up for the job. And I went in and I auditioned for it, and I ended up getting it, which was pretty cool. And it was, like I said, it was a bistro and it was an open kitchen. And I think we sat probably about 80 people. And I was at the grill cook position, and so my first night was a Friday night, which was so nerve-wracking. And we were set to turn our tables over twice that night. And so I was a ball of nerves. This is my first night, time to prove that I, deserve this job. And so I am plowing through my prep list. We are getting ready to open the doors in about 10 minutes, and I have like one thing left to do on my list. And so I am on autopilot. I'm just chopping things, like not even paying attention to what I'm doing. And I end up cutting the pad, a large portion of the pad of my middle finger off, but not all the way. And it was one of those cuts where you don't need to look down to know how badly you just cut yourself. You just know it was bad. And so, oddly enough, the woman who owned this restaurant did not believe in us wearing gloves on the line. And I'm not sure why, because I would think that people would want to see us wearing gloves in an open kitchen. But anyway, not a glove to be found behind our line there. And so I was like, I'm not going to let anybody know that this has just happened, because I really want to keep this job and prove to them that I can do this. So I was like, I'm just going to go to the bathroom, clean this up, figure something out, and be back at my station and ready to go when those doors open, and I'll figure this out later. And so I'm thinking I've got everybody fooled. And so I'm in the bathroom and I finally get the nerve to look down to see how much damage I've done. And I, you know, was a little queasy when I looked down and realized that I had cut a large portion of the end of my finger off. And I'm sitting there trying to think of what I'm going to do, because there's no gloves, there's no anything. And I'm washing it out and I hear this knock on the door, and it's the owner's husband. And so he's like, Kelly, are you in there? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in here. He's like, are you okay? And I was like, I'm kind of okay. And he's like, did you cut yourself? And I said, yeah, I did. He's like, yeah. He's like, there's quite a bit of blood leading from where you were into the bathroom. He's like, so I'm assuming you cut yourself quite badly. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty bad. I was like, do you have like a first aid kit? And he's like, well, why don't you open the door and let me see how bad you cut yourself? And I was like, okay. And so I let him in, and he's like, oh, you need to go to the hospital and get stitches immediately. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to the hospital. I was like, it's like 5 minutes till we open those front doors. This is my first night. I was like, I am not going to the hospital to get stitches. And so I was like, if you have a first aid kit, I was like, you can help me here, and we will just wrap this thing so tight that it's not even funny. And we'll put one of the finger condoms on there. And if you can find me gloves somewhere, that would be really great too, so that nothing gets in there. And so he gets all this stuff for me, and he did exactly what I asked him to do. He wrapped it as hard as he could, basically put a little tourniquet on my finger. And so I don't know how, but I finished out my first shift, and man, every time I hit it on something, I was almost brought to tears. And you know, he gave me a couple of the finger condoms and a couple of gloves, which is good because I was filling them up. I mean, I was bleeding like there was no tomorrow. And so somehow I made it through my shift. And I got home at probably, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning. And the guy that I was living with at that time, my boyfriend, he was 3 sheets to the wind when I got home. He was an alcoholic. And so I got home, and he's like, he asked me, he's like, what'd you do to your hand? And I was like, I cut myself really bad. He's like, how bad is really bad? And so I undid the dressing that my boss had put on there, and the whole thing just exploded in blood. I mean, everywhere. And he's like, oh my God, he's like, you need to go to the hospital and get stitches. I was like, nope, I'm not going to the hospital to get stitches, because I had already had, you know, probably 2 drinks by the time that this whole thing had unfolded, because I had had a glass of wine before I left work, and then I had another drink when I got home. And I was like, no, I'm not going to the emergency room. And so I remembered when I was in high school, I was on the fire department. And sometimes if we were far enough away from the hospital and we were on the ambulance crew, in the ambulance, we would super glue superficial wounds together to make them quit bleeding, because that's just what we did. And so I was like, you know what? I was like, let's just clean it up, super glue that piece back on. I was like, I'll be fine. We're not going to the emergency room. And so that's exactly what we did. We cleaned it out, super glued the piece of my finger back on, and everything was fine. I went to work the next day. So I worked Saturday and Sunday. I worked through the weekend. Again, no gloves. This woman would not allow us to wear gloves behind the line. So I have this horrible thing on my finger, and it's kind of starting to turn black a little bit, but I'm like, it'll be fine. You know, like, I was just focusing on keeping this job and doing a good job. And I was also drinking way too much at the time in my life, so it really wasn't a priority for me. And so we were closed on Mondays. And so by Monday, and my job was the grill station. So I was cutting down like quarter sections of swordfish and tuna and full ribeyes, and all without gloves on. So all of this stuff is getting into this wound. And so by Monday, I had quite the infection going on with my finger, and it had turned completely black. It was twice the size that it used to be. And I finally had to say, like, okay, I've got to, you know, go to the emergency room. Like, this is not okay. I've got to get some antibiotics or something. And so I got to the emergency room, and I was thinking, they're just going to give me some antibiotics, send me on my way, everything will be fine. No, they had to cut the piece back off that I had super glued on, and there's not enough painkillers in the world. So they put the needle to numb my finger right back in to where I had cut it, which was quite possibly, I thought at the time, the worst pain I'd ever felt. That was before I had a child. They put the needle right into where I had cut it to numb it, so that they could take a metal brush and scrub it out to get the infection out of there. And then they put the flap back on and sewed it back together, and sent me on my way with painkillers, which wasn't bad at the time. And so anyway, yeah, so they gave me my antibiotics and everything was fine. And, you know, within a week, my finger wasn't black anymore, and it had gone back to normal size. And this was in 2011. And the reason why I remember that is because it was the attacks on, or not 2011, the attacks on the World Trade Center. So it was 2001. And so I I worked there for a couple more months, and then I went in the day that that happened, and this woman was horrible. The woman I worked for, still today, I will tell you, this is the worst woman I've ever met in my life. She did not care what had happened that day to those people. And she was still mad at me about something that had happened like a couple days before, and she wouldn't talk to me at all during our like the time before we opened up the restaurant. And I asked her a question, and she got, you know, real crappy with me, like just pulled an attitude with me. And I looked at her and I'm like, I really can't work for somebody who acts the way that this woman does. Like, you know, even though I was like making bad decisions in my life, I was like, she really has no heart whatsoever, like cold as ice. And I just remember putting my knives in my bag. I rolled up my knife bag, I walked out the back door, never said a word to her. It was the only job I ever walked away from. And her husband called me later that night to find out what had happened. And I told him, he's like, you know, come back in. We're sorry. You know, she's sorry. And I was like, I just don't want to work for her anymore. I was like, she's just not a good person. And I just left it at that. And I ended up working or getting a job for the Denver Broncos the day after that. So it was actually a pretty cool thing that happened. So yeah, if you like the story, cool. If not, you know, go cry in the walk-in.